Well, you're in for a treat today. We are doing an experiment, a panel show, in which we get some of my all-time favorite guests of the podcast, and we talk about some of the interesting, exciting, confusing, upsetting news of the last week. And for this inaugural round, I have assembled for you Mona Charen, who is the policy editor at the Bulwark and the host of a great, relatively new podcast called The Mona Charen Show. We have Ivan Krastev, who is the founder of the Center for Liberal Strategies in Sofia and a permanent fellow at the Institute for Humane Sciences. I think that's the right translation from the German, in Vienna. And we have, of course, my co-conspirator at Persuasion and American Purpose, which he founded, Francis Fukuyama, who is a senior fellow at the Center for Democracy and the Rule of Law at Stanford. The way this is going to work is that we jump into a bunch of topics and hear very brief thoughts from each panelist about what they make of this topic, and then we have a bit of a free-for-all and think about it together. So one thing that's been on the news for the last week, but I have to say is a story that I've always sort of semi-ignored, as it's been bubbling in the background of our public discourse for the last 10 or 15 years because it just seems so sordid and unpleasant, but that now seems unignorable, is the Jeffrey Epstein scandal and the way in which Donald Trump and other major figures of the MAGAverse have promised great revelations about it. Allegedly, it now turns out that Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, has informed Donald Trump a few months ago that he is mentioned in all of those files, and suddenly Mr. Trump does not want to release them, and it looks as though there might be a little bit of a split in his coalition, where some members of it are sufficiently upset about this U-turn that there is some trouble brewing in that universe. Mona, what should we make of all of this? Is Donald Trump actually in trouble here?
So, Yascha, what I think, and by the way, thanks for having us all. This is great. So I propose that from now on, when you're looking in the dictionary for the definition of hoist by your own petard, that this story be featured as the prime example. Because Donald Trump and his minions have spent the last decade preparing the ground, training their fans and also the broader public to believe in absurd conspiracies, to believe that the QAnon fantasy, though it may be wrong in some details, is broadly right, that there are elites in this country who are engaged in a vast criminal conspiracy to abuse children and commit other crimes. And so they have ridden this horse. This is their doing. In fact, there was a quote in the paper just the other day from one of the influencers, MAGA influencers, who said, "We have been created in a lab to want this information." So there you have it. They created this monster, and now it is turning on them. So yes, it is the first time we've genuinely seen Trump running scared and seeming to fear his own people.
Thank you, Mona. Frank, what do you make of this?
I think that, if you've been following Trump's statements about Ghislaine Maxwell and his statements about the scandal in general, it's obvious that from the beginning he was afraid of this and he did not want this to come out. He's now engaged in this ridiculous campaign to try to divert people's attention by, calling for the criminal prosecution of Obama. And it's interesting that I don't think many people are buying this. The one thing that's occurred to me is that Trump has managed in a certain way to change the definition of what it means to be a conservative. I think that actually being a conservative now in the United States means that you believe in conspiracy theories. That more than any set of broader ideas is, what makes you a conservative. That, and it gets to the basic idea behind populism that, taking the red pill, you see that the world is really not what everybody else thinks it is. You have an insight to this alternative universe that's been created by elites and that is, completely manipulated by them. And that's why this is the only issue that's actually managed to stir this group up. It's not inflation, it's not the border, it's not, losing their Medicaid coverage. It's, it's this.
Ivan, this feels like such an American story. You, as someone who knows America well, is not an American, may not have much to say about it. But at the same time, perhaps this is the kind of strange scandal that lays populists down in other places as well.
Now listen, he promised his voters and followers a revolution, and revolution always lives in the shadow of betrayal. And the major question is he one of us or he's one of them? And from this point of view, basically, kind of Trump biography does not make it easy for some of the MAGA voters to be sure that he's one of them. And as a result of it, this is a crisis. I do believe that politically, most probably, he was going to be able in the short term to discipline his base. But this scandal is one of the scandals that is going to come back. So when they're going to be disappointed by something different, they're going always to come back to Epstein. And this is becoming a symbolic issue. I don't believe it's going to split his majority or his base on the short term, but you can see it always. In a certain way, the most important for political leaders like this is not to allow anybody to be, in this case, on the right of them. Because if you're not going to be able to discipline your radicals, you're always kind of in trouble. And here, it's not simply Obama's story, even the story with the Wall Street Journal and kind of declaring 10 billion after Murdoch and so on. This is very important because he likes the title, Trump versus Wall Street Journal. You can even not read the journal, Trump versus Wall Street. So in a certain way, he should try to reconfirm his anti-elite credentials, which are going to be really very much kind of a challenge by this. So it's interesting. It's also interesting to what extent, basically, for the Congress people, they feel that their legitimacy comes from Trump, and to what extent they believe that their legitimacy comes from this more radical wing of their own movement.
There is a structural problem for Trump because of what Frank and Ivan have both said. So Frank says that to be a conservative now is to believe in conspiracies. And I think that's obviously true. I mean, and you look at the fact that former Democrats like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard are welcome within the tent, not because of anything they believe except that they are conspiracists. And that mindset is now like the definition, almost the definition of MAGA. Okay, so the conspiracy mindset is in the saddle. And it has, as Ivan says, some very radical voices like Tucker Carlson and others. And for running for office, this is a perfectly great strategy. But now the structural problem is they are in office. And how do you navigate? How do you manage to be, I'm going to reveal all the guy who's going to reveal all the secrets, throw open the files, etc., when you're actually in power and when you genuinely have something to hide, which, it doesn't seem to have occurred to the MAGA faithful until now that the guy they believe above everybody else, if he says there was no Russian interference in the election and 16 intelligence agencies say the opposite, they believe him, etc. They've believed him on every single thing. And they believed him on Epstein. And yet, of all the celebrities and major figures in American life, he is the one who was closest to Epstein. Trump was.
We finally found Pizzagate, Frank.
Yeah, what I was about to say. It's interesting that the Wall Street Journal, Murdoch's Wall Street Journal, is the one that's standing up to him when CBS and ABC have all collapsed and paid him, millions of dollars in tribute.
Yep.
They obviously were prepared for this lawsuit and the onslaught that he would launch after they published the article about the letter that he had sent to Jeffrey Epstein, and they're continuing to. They're obviously sitting on a lot more information, and it looks like Murdoch and the editors at the Journal are not going to back down on this. So it's interesting that the one kind of center-right publication is the only one that actually has any balls to really stand up to Trump.
I'm not a fan of
leaked it-
Rupert Murdoch, but it was very interesting, the Theranos scandal, that he was one of a few people who came off relatively well on it. He was on the board of Theranos, and
Yes.
Elizabeth Holmes went to appeal to him when the big investigative story in the Wall Street Journal was percolating to say, you've got to close this down. This is going to affect your investment interests. And Murdoch said, no, I can't do that. I'm going to let them do their job.
Yeah, that was probably his finest moment.
Let's go to
Can I just
Ivan.
make one point which very much goes with something that Mona said. The art of being a populist in power is to be in office, but to pretend that you're never in power.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most important thing. Even when you're winning elections, even when basically you're appointing all people, it's very important for your own voters to believe that you're in opposition, that somebody else is ruling. Because in a certain way, if you really are in power, what about the idea of the all-powerful deep state? What about the idea of the all-powerful elites? And I do believe this is an interesting type of a story, and this is type of a balance that you should do. And here is where Trump should show how powerful he is, and at the same time how weak he is. And this is not easy to balance, and particularly not easy for Trump. But it's not typical for Trump. I do believe this was, you can see it in places like Poland, where Kaczynski was as if almighty, and on the other side claiming nothing basically can be done because other people are running the show.
Could I just make? I remembered what I was just going to say about Frank's point, and it's this: whoever leaked this information to the Wall Street Journal was obviously thinking very carefully about the dynamics of the American press at the moment, and recognized that if the Journal went for it, it's a twofer, because not only do you get the Journal going after Trump, but you get Fox defanged. Because, normally Fox would be the cheering section to say this is all lies. The media's after Trump. You shouldn't believe it. You should dismiss it. But they can't do that when they're also owned by Murdoch. So brilliant on the part of the leaker, I have to say.
Very interesting. It does feel, this is something that a political scientist who studies scandals told me yesterday, that we're kind of in the deadly drip, drip, drip phase of a scandal. We're sort of back to traditional scandal. We thought that Trump was beyond traditional scandal, but this feels a little bit like traditional scandal, and we're in the phase of drip, drip, drip. I thought that was a very astute observation by this scholar. The thing that I don't know is, what is the payoff at the end going to be? I mean, with the scandals, the drip, drip, drip is so damaging because at the end there's an explosion, right? At the end, it turns out that they really have done the horrible thing. And with Trump, he obviously partied with Epstein in the 1990s. He obviously is somebody who has a complicated lifestyle, but are we going to ever find the piece of evidence that actually is super damaging or not? And probably how this plays out may depend on that. So I don't want to take up the whole conversation with Epstein, but I heard slightly different instincts from you about how damaging this is going to end up being for Trump. I mean, when we look back at his presidency in 4 years, is this going to be a weird side story, a weird diversion, or is this the moment when the wheels start coming off the car? And I'm just aware of the fact that, both in the first Trump presidency and even in the last 6 months, we've already fought, the Russia stuff, firing of Comey, the phone call with Zelensky, January 6th, Liberation Day, right? Like, we always think something is going to make the wheels come off a car, and the car, for better or probably worse, is so far still going. How impactful is this actually going to be?
Well, I would just say that this differs from all those previous examples, Yascha, in that this is a problem from within the House. It's within Trump's own coalition that this is hurting him. And so there is that. And there are two outcomes, both of which, there are many possible outcomes, but two of them are both quite damaging, I think. The first is that there really is a revelation of Trump himself engaging with, say, underage women. That's possible. But I doubt that. I think he was probably just a hanger-on, and, he socialized, didn't mind, obviously didn't mind what Epstein was up to. But the second part of it, I think, could well be because with all of this pressure to release all this information, if what happens is they do release everything they can possibly lay their hands on, and by the way, some of it should not be released, but I'm not going to go down that as a matter of legality, but leave that aside for a second. They release everything they possibly can. And what do they discover? It's not the vast conspiracy that MAGA has been pining for. It's not that, there was this huge child sex ring that involved Tom Hanks and Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi, etc., Barack Obama. It was just the very evil acts of a few individuals.
I do believe politically on the short term he's going to survive, but there are two things that makes it really important that this is a ghost that is going to come back. If you see all this paranoid imagination, it's very much about our children. This fear of the world to come. And by the way, you can see it in other places. Basically, the first anti-Western legislation voted in Russia was the Dima-Yakovlev law, the ban of Americans for adopting Russian orphans and so on. Everything is about the children. So you have basically the law that is threatening our children. So from this point of view, this is a scandal that cannot go away. From this point of view, this is like with Monica Lewinsky, it's always coming. When basically you're politically, it's always coming. But secondly, in my view, it's going to change the way Trump is going to behave. He now really has a strong incentive to radicalize in one way or the other because he does not want to stay in this Epstein scandal for a long time. And this is, in my view, also interesting. Not is he going to lose support and gain support, but how this is also going to shape his own strategies, what he believes that he's doing and not doing. And from this point of view, I do believe this is really a kind of a critical moment, but I don't believe this is the moment in which he's going to lose important part of his voting base. It needs much more time and a different type of stories for this to happen.
That's enough Epstein for today, I think. Yesterday, as we're recording this, that's enough Epstein for today, I think. Another thing that's happened this week is that there's an important development in the Trump administration's war on American universities. It looked for the last months as though the administration is really fighting to kill, as though it really has just decided that it wants to damage at least institutions like Columbia and Harvard as much as it possibly can with the power of federal government, which is quite a lot. Yesterday, on Wednesday, the Trump administration appears to have reached a settlement with Columbia University in which Columbia will pay a $200 million fine, promise to undertake certain steps, including fight against anti-Semitism on its campus, including putting the Department of Near Eastern Studies under a certain kind of supervision by appointing a senior administrator who will have oversight over it, and other kinds of steps. And in return, federal funding, particularly from scientific bodies like the NIH and so on, is being restored to the university. How should we think about this? I mean, is this a great victory for the Trump administration that's going to completely cow universities? And obviously, I think there's real sacrifices of academic freedom involved in the settlement that should concern academics. Or is this a relative climb down in which the administration says our goal is no longer to destroy you, we just want to make you a little bit pliable, and then you're allowed to get on with your job? How should we interpret what just happened there?
There was a report issued by the conservative Manhattan Institute talking about this, and I think that it kind of revealed the long-term plans, because they made a lot of, reasonable critiques about anti-Semitism and the lax, enforcement of academic freedom by universities, which most people could agree with. But then the solution wasn't an institutional one. I mean, it wasn't, there ought to be some oversight board that, looks at the behavior of universities and the way they guard academic freedom. It was that the federal government, ought to centralize authority over, things like curriculum and basically put it in the hands of one person, meaning the president. And, I think that it kind of indicates the direction of their thinking, that they really do want not just this temporary victory over Colombia, but they want to be able to dictate to all universities, what it is they can do in terms of hiring, in terms of academic speech and the like. And so I think that this is just the beginning of a much longer struggle.
Ivan, you've seen, in Central Europe, a Central European University jumped out of Hungary through, pressure from the Hungarian state, relocate to Vienna, where you lived part of the time. Is this the beginning of something like that? How concerned are you for American universities?
There are many reasons to be concerned for American universities, but in my view, I see a logic which is not so different than the trade wars, where Colombia is in the position of the United Kingdom, where you are making a kind of a fuzz deal in order to make a pressure on other universities. And also it's quite important to see how the students and professors are going basically to buy this deal, to what extent this is going to affect the internal dynamics. And this is, from this point of view, interesting, because you have all these young people, and young people more than anybody else wants to be heroic, and you can see how difficult for the American university is to be heroic. And to defend and to basically try to mobilize. And also the way the administration is using the anti-discrimination language, which was very much basically the language that was used against them. I'm saying this because the difference with the CU and others was that CU was removed legally on a very kind of a technical grounds. He wants to kill the university, you go on the legal language. I do believe here you are part of a much bigger cultural war that goes beyond one university. And in my view, the most important to know, has he won or not, is try to see how the other universities are going to behave, how this is going to affect the strategies of the other big universities, Harvard, but not only Harvard.
So there are a number of layers to this that disturb me. First of all, I do not believe the administration. I don't take that as acting in good faith when they say they are worried about anti-Semitism. And I do think the universities are vulnerable on that matter, and they deserve a slap on the wrist about the way they handled the aftermath of October 7th, etc., and many other things. But this is an administration that has surrounded itself with some quite vicious anti-Semites, and Trump himself has dined with Fuentes and Ye at Mar-a-Lago. So that's a fig leaf. That's a way of a weapon to bludgeon universities for other reasons. And they regard universities, many of the people like Russ Vought and the other sort of semi-intellectuals in the administration, they regard the universities, which tend left to be on the left side of the spectrum, as the enemy, and they do want to destroy them. So that's the anti-Semitism piece. But the way this has unfolded is really disturbing, because what the administration is doing is counter to so many laws and traditions in this country. So the idea, universities get so much of their funding through contracts with the federal government, okay? And the contracts are between the NIH and the, Department of Biology or whatever, I'm simplifying. But contracts are legal documents. The federal government cannot, just as any other entity that enters into a binding contract, cannot just abrogate it for no reason. And so in the normal course of things, the response of the university should have been to sue and say, you can't abrogate these. We've abided by our side. You can't just do this to put pressure on us on other matters. It's not legitimate. And they have not done that. This university certainly has not chosen to do that, not chosen to sue, which I don't really understand. There are certain limited situations in which the government can assert through sovereignty, that it doesn't have to fulfill a contract. But that's usually in matters that are very, very narrow. So the federal government here is being lawless. by attempting to abrogate a contract for no good reason. And the universities, cowed, are saying, okay, what can we do to placate you? And I'm not sure whether it is pressure from alumni, from donors. I'm not sure why they are so timid. But the fact is, the administration is asserting power here that it does not have.
It's basically extortion, right? I mean, you extort something from a business by threatening an innocent person that matters to the business owner and say, I'm going to shoot this person if you don't, pay me a certain amount of money. And that's what they're doing. They're holding, the medical research at Columbia and Harvard hostage, and they're going to shoot that hostage if the universities don't pay up. And so, yeah, it's completely illegal, and it is very mysterious why they're not trying to fight this thing out in the courts.
One of the things I've heard from friends in the sciences is sort of, we're just trying to do the scientific research and we're being punished for the crazies over in the department of fill the blank. And of course, the reason for that is what the administration has power over. The administration would love to continue funding some of that scientific research, for obviously there's anti-scientific voices in Washington as well, and close down the Department of Comparative Literature. But the Department of Comparative Literature doesn't get federal funding, and so the leverage that the administration has is over things like the sciences, which is sort of a paradoxical element of this situation. There's a real debate among academics, and I've seen a few iterations of this in a very lively way at lunches and dinners over the last weeks, between people who are saying universities are under attack from the Trump administration in a deeply illiberal way. Whatever concerns they claim to have about free speech and anti-Semitism are clearly hypocritical, even if there are some genuine problems at universities. Our task is just to defend the university, and we shouldn't air our dirty laundry in public. We shouldn't be upfront about some of the things that are actually wrong on campuses. Other people would say, no, the reason why the university has become so vulnerable to attack is that there are real shortcomings. And unless we use this opportunity to fix and reform them, we are going to continue bleeding and eroding the support from the American public. Is there a way of walking and chewing gum at the same time here? Is there a way for universities to use this moment to address the genuine shortcomings on campus and also resist Trump on the obvious overreach of the administration? Or do universities have to choose between circling the wagon and surrendering to Trump?
I mean, I think they obviously can walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, there has to be a recognition on the part of, progressives that the excesses that they were supporting at a certain point really was one of the reasons why you've got this ferocious right-wing reaction. But you can also say that these are not comparable threats, that the threat of cancel culture and, identity politics and so forth is a genuine threat to academic freedom. But right now, the big threat is putting the power of the state behind an attempt to control academic speech. But yeah, I think you can make both of those points simultaneously.
Yeah. I would just phrase it in terms of the immediate threat and the medium-term threat. The immediate threat is this attack by the Trump administration, but the intermediate-term threat is the very radicalism that has come to dominate these campuses with which, the left has not grappled. And it does bother me that for the last 10 years, people who were Republicans in their earlier lives, are constantly fielding the accusation of, you created this, you created Trump. It's entirely your fault for ever having thought that rent control was a problem, or, that the schools are a public sector monopoly that doesn't work well, etc. And the fact is, the left needs to look in the mirror too about itself and say, what had we done that caused a backlash of this ferocity? And some of that is what is the kinds of things that happen on campuses.
Yeah, I want to agree very much, because in my view, part of this strategy of attacking universities is to try to defend everything that Trump is attacking. And in my view, this is the most wrong strategies of everything. And talking to some colleagues in American universities, they're going to say it works so well because even many people on the liberal side did not really believe some of the things that have been running in the universities for a long time. And from this point of view, going and trying and saying, we're changing it, but not because Trump is doing this and that, but because we're in a period in which all positions are going to be redefined. Because Trump basically totally reinvented the Republican position in the United States is going to be about reinvention of everybody else. And I believe this is an important question. And from this point of view, staying on a defensive, he's going to push more and more to defend certain things that nobody wants to defend, but everybody feels obliged to defend because he's attacking it. And as a result of it, you're allowing him to shape the agenda. And in my view, this is the most important.
So I agree with all of you. I mean, just to motivate my question, Michael Roth spoke at the president of Wesleyan University, spoke at the Heterodox Academy recently and took the, strongly the other position. He said, your complaints at the Heterodox conferences for almost 10 years now about being too woke, about not having enough jobs for white people, about too many women in the academy. I mean, too many women in the academy. I don't think the Heterodox conference has complained about that. Have found resonance with an authoritarian push to control our spaces. We can make nice and not say that, and we can't. Look, we can make nice and not say that, and we won't get investigated, or we can do our job, which is to call the indecent attack on our sector indecent, wrong-headed, lawless, authoritarian, fascistic, choose your own words. But if you sit there and worry about the sociology department and whether Near Eastern studies is really anti-Semitic, I think you're doing the work of authoritarianism. So I think that's interesting and telling, because on university campuses, the swing constituency that's often decisive is the center-left liberals. And I think under the Biden administration, you could gain the cooperation of center-left liberals for pushing back against some of the obvious excesses of the previous years to a limited extent, right? On things, for example, like getting rid of mandatory diversity statements in faculty hiring, which, as we know from lots of documents, were really just used as an ideological litmus test, where if you're not sounding like a critical race theorist, you're ruled right out of contention from the very get-go. And I worry that now that Trump is attacking the universities in ways that really are deeply concerning, as all of you have also said, the deep instinct is going to be to sound exactly like Michael Roth. But a lot of those center-left faculty are going to say, even though we privately have some concerns about what's going on in some of the departments at our university and what some scholars are doing, and perhaps they're not doing rigorous research and they really have just become ideological activists, we have to circle the wagon and shut up. And so I'm worried that universities aren't going to do the work of self-reform precisely because of the attacks from Donald Trump.
Yascha, that is an across-the-board challenge. It comes up in so many other contexts as well. For example, I was just having a conversation with somebody about Mamdani, the candidate for mayor of New York. Some of us find some of his statements really problematic. We have criticized him. But when you find that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene are accusing him of wanting to impose Sharia law, and that some of the crazier voices in MAGA are saying absolutely absurd and hysterical things, there's a problem where you find yourself feeling not wanting to be associated with that kind of rhetoric. And so you almost want to defend Mamdani, whereas he does deserve criticism, and it happens again and again on the issue of trans rights. You think, well, there really is a middle position here that's cautious about how we handle children, but that respects absolutely people, adults. And you find that people on the right are saying very hateful and damaging things, and suddenly it makes it so much harder, but no less necessary, I would say, to make those critical distinctions and not to have the Roth reaction of we just have to circle the wagons.
I could make a prediction about the future, always dangerous, but I do think that the total effect of the Trump administration is going to push the Democratic Party to the left, and it's going to further entrench its progressive wing. for exactly these sorts of reasons. And I think that you could have a Jeremy Corbyn kind of outcome where, the first attempt to counter the Trump administration in 2028 is a yet more radical person on the left who's going to go down in flames, and so you'll have another 4 years of a conservative Republican administration. And I personally would like to see the Democratic Party move to the center kind of stout defensive liberalism position, but I'm afraid that it's not going to happen.
And this is why I fear that the reports of the death of wokeness are much exaggerated, or at least much premature. But we will keep tracking this on the podcast. Since the beginning of the Ukraine war, a bunch of people who have never been seriously interested in defending the sovereignty of Ukraine, a bunch of people who were really just making excuses for Russia's terrible illegal invasion of Ukraine, have claimed that Volodymyr Zelensky is really just a dictator. And by and large, I think that has been just empty, inconvenient rhetoric in not very savory ideological course. There are now protests in Kiev and other Ukrainian cities against some of Zelensky's recent decisions, including, as I understand it, a move to suppress the corruption watchdog that is quite important in Ukraine. And a number of people inside the country who obviously care about their country's sovereignty and autonomy, who are very much on the side of fighting off the Russian invasion, are now voicing concerns that Zelensky at this stage has started to consolidate power in ways that are concerning. What are we to make of these developments and of those protests? How concerned should we be about Zelensky's recent decisions, and how is that going to affect the country's ability under increasingly desperate circumstances to defend itself against the Russian onslaught?
Listen, this is very much a continuation of the previous discussion, because the story is when your country in a war, how openly you should talk about your concerns about corruption. The fear that basically anything that you can say can be utilized and weaponized by your critics. And from this point of view, what has happened is, for sure there is corruption. And war and corruptions rhyme easily anywhere, so there is nothing specific about this. This is the moment in which people are doing incredibly unimaginable heroic stuff, and it's also other people doing other things, trying to buy themselves out and trying to make money, and nothing particularly about Ukraine. What we are seeing now was something different, and this is that because of the very difficult situation on the battlefield, because of the fact that Zelensky administration understand that there is a kind of a growing disappointment that they're going to press to make an unpopular decision, there was the instinct that they should consolidate power. And it went is the attack on these anti-corruption bodies. And to be honest, they made a mistake. Because three things happened, and there is a development from the last 48 hours. Factually, what happened was that President Zelensky, much more the head of the administration, Mr. Yermak, started attack on the two independent anti-corruption agencies. Some people have been arrested. The new legislation have been voted, and on the same day signed by the president, which put them under the control of the general prosecutor, who is appointed by the president. But then suddenly you have 1,000 people on the streets, not only Kiev, but some big cities. And listen, this is not simply citizens. Some of them were citizen soldiers. And secondly, you have a very strong reactions from European Union particularly, and both Merz and Macron talked to basically Zelensky. And what I hear from Kiev is that basically Zelensky is going to withdraw this legislation, and he's going to come with a new kind of a legislation that is going to keep the independence of these anti-corruption bodies. And this is difficult because it poses a question which is very, very important. There is a lot of kind of anti-corruption move, as you can imagine, also on the Russian side, where they basically change half of their Ministry of Defense and general staff because of the corruption accusation. But you're never going to have people on the street in Russia. who are protesting corruption. And the story of competitiveness and the weaknesses of democracies in a time of a war, and particularly when the war does not go well, this is an important issue. I do believe that Zelensky got the message, and also he understood that probably the Trump tolerance and total uninterest in corruption is not going to be shared by the Europeans on this, because this was his idea. Anti-corruption was the Biden stuff. Now I'm going basically to move beyond it. It's not the case, and this is a good news. This is a good news for Ukraine, because in my view, democracy, you understand, is it there or not there when you understand what cannot happen. In a certain way, we know where the line is, and in a certain way, there was a line, and this line was not crossed. And they're going to be revision of this kind of a legislation.
Yeah, I think that Zelensky has pulled back on this because of the foreign pressure, and so that's good. It would have been incredibly damaging if he had really tried to dismantle these anti-corruption bodies. But this has been brewing for a long time. A lot of my Ukrainian friends have said that, Zelensky's problem is for all that he's been a leader of a democratic country, he doesn't understand institutions, that it's been a matter of personal power ever since the beginning of the full-scale war. He has no longer-term plans for if there is a ceasefire, if the war winds down, how do you make a transition back to regular institutional rule? How do you create, recreate political parties that actually have some independence and can actually have a debate over policies? All of this has been suspended, and I think it's going to continue to be a problem in Ukraine, because they are going to have to unwind this power centralization at some point. And I think it's very worrisome that, if I were Ukrainian, I'd be out in the streets demonstrating as well. But this is really a bad look for the country. I think the demonstrations at some point could actually spiral into something bigger, because there's a lot of unhappiness. There's obviously tremendous war weariness in that country. So it's a very critical moment.
And part of the concern is that if it's the foreign influence, and part of the concern is that if it's the foreign pressure that has made Zelensky desist, and the foreign pressure, of course, is so effective in part because Ukraine needs help from abroad in order to survive, that kind of pressure may not be available once the peace comes. Mona?
What makes me grieve about this story is that I am seeing all of these Ukrainians in the midst of a war taking to the streets on a matter that is important for a democracy, for a republic, that is corruption. It is not, a kitchen table issue. It isn't the price of eggs, etc. It's the nature of their system. And they care enough to show their displeasure by taking to the streets. And in our country, we are witnessing the most florid corruption that we have seen in a very long time. We have seen our president accepting an airplane from Qatar, floating a meme coin. The level of personal enrichment and corruption that is now being shrugged off by the American people is shocking. And it seems that somehow that impulse or that antibody has been disabled in America. We're not that concerned about corruption, and that's a deeply dismaying thing.
What is the stage of the war in Ukraine? Obviously, I get reports that the situation on the battlefield, as one of you just said, is pretty challenging and dire for Ukraine at the moment. Europeans are doing what they can, or at least claim to be doing what they can to support Ukraine. The United States has zigzagged and gone back and forth in really odd ways for the last months. Obviously, Trump has not historically been in any way sympathetic to Ukraine and Zelensky, and there was the really unseemly spectacle of his dressing down of Zelensky in the Oval Office. At the same time, it seems as though Trump has had a little bit of a falling out with Putin, as though he had perhaps naively expected that Putin really did want peace and really would strike some kind of peace deal on favorable terms. And even after offering Putin very favorable terms, Putin has not bitten. And it seems, at least right now, as though Trump actually has gotten angry about that and started some forms of support for Ukraine again. Is there any prospect for this horrible war ending on terms that are in any way fair to Ukraine? What's the end game here?
So we don't know what's the end game, but we know one thing, that Russians started a major offensive, believing that they can break the Ukrainian defense. The problem is, do they have resources for another offensive? It's not going to work now. And in a strange way, even these 50 days that Trump was saying, I'm waiting to see this and that, he is trying to see basically what they can get and what they can lose. And this is going to be, of course, a very difficult situation, because what has disappeared is the idea of the Ukrainian victory. But on the other side, the Russian victory also does not look in the way probably President Putin is seeing it. So this autumn is going to be critically important. And it is going to be critically important because on the long term, President Putin is going to have a much more structural kind of constraints to go with this kind of a mass story. There is the demographic issues, the economic issues, and others. But what Frank said is totally true. Ukrainians are extremely exhausted. Listen, we are strange people. When the war started, people say Ukraine is not going to stay for 2 weeks. And then after they showed their resistance, we believe that nothing can change them. Nothing can break their will to stay. They're normal people who defending their countries. They felt betrayed by everybody. Europeans, of course, are doing certain things. They're not doing others. But also what Ukrainians starts to believe that most of the European support is much more against Russia than particularly for Ukraine. And this is an issue. And I do believe that we're going to have certain things at the end of the autumn. For President Trump, the biggest surprise was he believed that for the Russians, the most important is the relations with him. And then suddenly he realized that for Putin, Ukraine is much more important than Trump. And for somebody like Trump to understand that something is more important than him, of course, is making him very much unhappy. But this is the reality. And I do believe that all these kind of expectations that you're going to have a major deal with the Russians and saying, let's talk about Arctic, let's talk about this and stop fighting, is not going to work. There is one thing on which, to be honest, Trump helped, and it helped now the Ukraine and the West to be the peace party. So now the idea that basically Ukrainians want to fight and the Russians want peace, even the pro-Russian kind of a circles in Europe at least cannot stay this anymore. It's quite obvious that basically it started as a Putin's war, it continues as a Putin's war.
Well, it's a fact of the times in which we live that the fate of Ukraine rests upon the moods and whims of an unstable 13-year-old boy who can be flattered and who can be deceived easily, and so that is the depressing part. The less depressing part, I suppose you could say, is that Putin's naked aggression has awakened the Europeans, and that in a way that I think none of us quite saw before. That they really are getting serious. They are, I was just looking at a piece in the Financial Times showing that they are filling in many of the gaps of funding where for weapons that the U.S. Paused or whatever. So I'm not saying that they are perfect. Not saying that the U.S. can even be replaced, but just that the strengthening of European resolve is a good thing, but not sure where this will all lead.
We started with Trump. I suppose it's a sign of the times that we'll have to end with Trump on the last segment as well. One of the big stories of the last few weeks is Trump's attempt to really undermine the independence of various agencies that have historically had some amount of separation from the will of the president. The Supreme Court this week allowed the administration to fire the three members of the Consumer Protection Board that had been appointed by Democrats, and so this is a way of turning potentially agencies that were supposed to have a kind of a balanced bipartisan composition into much more partisan bodies. The other dog that has barked very loudly but not quite bitten yet, to vulgarize that metaphor, is the independence of the Fed. It's been clear for a very long time that Trump is hoping to remove Jerome Powell as the chair of the Fed. He appears to have waved in front of Republican legislators some letter that would demand his resignation. So far, Powell continues to be the chair of the Fed. How worried should we be about attacks on the independence of the Fed, in particular when it comes to things like the value of a dollar and America's ability to borrow in international markets? And how worried should we be more broadly about these attempts by the White House to really turn every aspect of the administrative state into a kind of executioner of what how many years did he give him, Mona? The 13-year-old child or the 7-year-old child in the White House wants. Frank, why don't we start with you?
Well, there's two different issues. So there's a short-term issue with the Fed, and then there's a broader-term issue about the unitary executive and Trump's control over the whole of the U.S. government. So in terms of the Fed, I think that what Trump has been demanding, it shows you exactly why you need an independent central bank. Of all of the times in recent economic history, this is absolutely the worst time to have a Fed chair that will do what Trump wants, which is to lower interest rates, because we have inflation that is creeping up. We have a lot of economic uncertainty, but meanwhile, the country is doing pretty well. The economy continues to grow, and we don't need to lower interest rates in order to, he obviously wants to juice growth up a little bit, but it's going to have disastrous inflationary consequences if interest rates are lowered. But there's a bigger problem that has not been broadly recognized. Trump has been dismantling all of the multi-member commissions in turn, the EEOC, the FEC, there's a whole bunch of other commissions other than the Fed that have been traditionally run by boards where there's a balanced partisan representation on a kind of rolling basis. That ability or that system was supported by a 1930s Supreme Court decision called Humphrey's Executor, and a lot of conservatives, including the conservatives on the current Supreme Court, have been gunning for this for a long time. And so it's not a surprise that they are supporting Trump's, effort to be able to fire individual commissioners on these commissions. The one thing that they haven't touched is the Fed, because they know that politically that's really, that's like touching a hot stove, and politically that's going to be very damaging. And so, they've procedurally allowed Trump to go ahead, but they put off, simply overturning Humphrey's Executor. But that's going to come in the next year. However, there's a bigger issue that has not gotten any coverage, which is, in addition to these very high-level policy positions, the Trump administration has wanted to basically have put everybody in the federal government on an at-will employment basis, meaning that all, million members of the federal civil service could be replaced by a political appointee. Now, the United States before Trump had about 4,000 to 5,000 so-called Schedule Cs. These were political appointees that are put in positions. I was a Schedule C when I was in the State Department. So 4,000 to 5,000 is about 3,900 more than in any other parliamentary democracy, where you have a permanent bureaucracy. You don't have this kind of political control reaching into lower levels. And now
the striking thing in the United Kingdom, Frank, sorry, just to illustrate this point, is that I believe even senior cabinet ministers, senior ministers of the British government get to appoint basically two people, two special assistants, one of whom does policy and one of whom does media. And that's it. Other than that, they have to rely on a nonpartisan civil service. In the United States, as you're saying, for a long time, we've had this tradition of thousands of political appointees, which is really quite unusual compared to other democracies.
Now it's going to be hundreds of thousands. And I think that, so this is the situation that existed during the patronage era in the 19th century. And it was walked back by passage of the Pendleton Act in 1883 that established the principle of a merit-based bureaucracy. I mean, every other modern country in the world has a merit-based bureaucracy. It's almost the definition of being a modern country. We only got to this by the 1880s, and even so, we didn't fully apply this merit principle. And so this is a fundamental attack on the basic idea that you ought to have qualifications in order to serve in the U.S. government. Before the Pendleton Act, every postmaster in the United States would turn over if there was an election and the other party won. And I think this is one of the big motives for the Republicans wanting to, they've actually created, it used to be Schedule F, there's now a new Schedule G that would basically put everybody at risk. And I think they want to have, employment for their loyalists, all the MAGA people that really don't have the qualification to run anything from a post office on up, can be given jobs under this situation. And so you're going to return to this total politicization of the entire federal bureaucracy, patronage, huge opportunities for overt corruption. So I agree with Mona that it's kind of depressing that the high-level corruption has really not produced much blowback, but you're going to have corruption from the top of the federal government, to the bottom, if they continue down this road.
I didn't think that it was possible to make my local branch of the USPS less efficient than it is, but I guess having it run for 5 years by some MAGA person and then for 5 years by some super woke person designed by the Democrats, that's going to do the trick. It'll somehow get even worse.
I completely agree with what Frank said, and I think it's one of the longer term dangers of what Trump and populism are doing, because they don't recognize that the strength of this country is that it's very solid, firm institutions, the rule of law, the expectation that the Fed, for example, will be independent. You can trust putting your money here. You can trust lending us money, which we borrow a lot, and you can trust, building a factory here and so on, because the laws and rules aren't going to change the next day. There are, all of these things have to go through procedures, and those things are solid. And what what this crowd is attempting to do is to undermine all of that. To make it all subject to the whims of those in power, which will make us much less like a first world country and more like Argentina and other places that have not done well, leaving aside what Milei is doing now, which apparently is okay.
Listen, in my view, it even goes deeper. I don't believe that President Trump believes that they are neutral institutions or independent institutions. You are either with us or against us. And from this point of view, this is a classical Schmittian understanding of politics. And in this Schmittian world, there is not much for Max Weber and his idea of bureaucracy. The real issue is that even if this is over, the independence of the institutions is not easy to be restored. You're seeing this in the case of Poland and others. It takes time when the party loyalty is overtaken by the loyalty of the institutions to which you start to work. In a certain way, you are not born kind of person who is going to be serving in the independent institutions. This is a type of socialization and so on that can be broken. So as a result of it, the moment you're politicizing as much the administration as you do, is that after Republican state, you're going to have a Democratic state. And you're going to change, and you're always going to have two administrations which are just, you're changing everybody. In Greece, the story was that when you change the prime minister in 1970s, you're changing also all the cleaning ladies in the government. And I do believe this is the story, and this is the long-term effect of polarization. And this is something that comes naturally to populist leaders. Here, Trump is not in a group of his own. This is the general logic of this understanding of politics.
Just a little history lesson. The Pendleton Act had actually been introduced by George Pendleton several years before its passage. It was only passed because President James A. Garfield was assassinated by a would-be office seeker who was mad that he didn't get the position as a consul general to France, and so he killed the president. And that was what finally shamed Congress into voting for this act that created a merit-based bureaucracy. So, and even then, it took another 40 years to get the number of political appointees down to 4,000. Yes.
I was just going to mention the office seeker problem, and by the way, there's just an amazing book about Garfield's assassination. The poor man lingered for a month with the bullet inside his body, and had it not been for the incompetent interventions of his physicians who kept putting their filthy fingers inside his body attempting to extract the bullet, he probably would have been able to survive, but they gave him sepsis and he died.
Oh my God! Thank you for this lovely story. Even I think what you're describing, I think even what you're describing is a kind of post-populist dilemma, right? You have populists who are in office and degrade the institutions and norms of the system, and then you have new people come in. And one problem, as you're saying, is socialization, that just everybody in the state has gotten used to the idea that they're spoils, right? They've gotten used to the supporters of the other side got to be, consul in France. Why am I not getting to be consul in France, right? The other problem that you're seeing very clearly in a place like Poland is how do you restore the rules without breaking the rules, right? Like if people have been appointed in illegal ways, how do you fire them without yourself breaking the rules? How is that going to play out? Let's dream for a moment and say in 2028, Trump, loses a democratic election to a good, sensible, energetic, reasonable democratic candidate. Are we going to be far enough down this path that America is going to face this post-populist dilemma? And what advice can we give that candidate? What do you do in that situation?
Listen, it's very difficult because you're going to need some job seeker to do something bad here or there, because in a certain way you should try to see the result of this total politicization. But it's very difficult. If you see a party loyalist put in a position, be in the Federal Reserves or in other positions, when the other party comes to power, they know that they cannot trust on their cooperation. They're seeing them simply as the soldiers of the other party, which is the case of Poland, which Tusk is seeing. And then you either try to basically change the institution, or you're trying to create other story of pressure. And as a result of it, you're going to appoint other people. But even if you're kind of a noble-minded, the story is to what extent anybody else is going to see them as an independent players. So for me, this is the very destruction of the idea of the possibility for independent or neutral institutions, which is so important for any liberal society, that have been destroyed. And I'm saying from this point of view, America is not different than many other places. And it's going to take time. When you see what they're going to do it, unfortunately, I do believe that before seeing the excesses of this, before seeing a doctor who is competent to the idea that basically is going to kill his patient, when you try to understand that in a strange way you should go back to a different type of selection of, be it public servants, being basically people whom you're putting on high position. And here the strengths of the professional communities are incredible. They're very important because this peer pressure when it comes to judges and so on, whom you're going to put on the Supreme Court and so on, are very important. And if this is going to disappear, it's going to take even a longer time.
It's a tough thing. It's hard. It's so much easier to destroy than to build. and we will face this, I think, right away in 20. Just for example, if Kash Patel is still director of the FBI in 2028, in theory, the FBI director is supposed to serve for 10 years. Trump destroyed that norm. Is an incoming president going to uphold the norm by firing Kash Patel or not? I mean, it's actually quite tricky. But in the end, I guess I feel the need, since I've said so many grim things, to say at least something somewhat hopeful. In the post-Watergate era in this country, we did see a public appetite for reform, and we saw serious people undertake to try to prevent anything like Watergate from happening again. And so there are moments when the public is receptive.
Let's end on a hopeful note. I'm not sure how many we're going to get. Ivan, Frank, Mona, thank you so much for your insights and for being our guinea pigs. Hopefully you all had fun. I had a lot of fun, so perhaps we can do it again. Hopefully, dear listeners, you all had fun. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Yascha.
Thank you.